All right, we've got an update also, an email on, I want to run through this real quick, but we've said, my God, when we're watching Raw, that it just, the entrances take forever and the malingering of everything to the point where sometimes somebody will start to the ring for their match and the bell will ring for that match 12, 13, 14 minutes later, right? With all the things going on distracting. Well, this is an email from John, who was at the Monday Night Raw, it's almost a month ago now in Grand Rapids, 3 or 4 weeks, whatever it was. But you know me, I'm behind on emails. But would you like to hear his experience for how it looks as a live event to the people in the building if we think it's boring on television?
How Monday Night Raw looks to the live audience.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd love to hear this.
Well, dear Jim, I was at last night's Monday Night Raw in Grand Rapids. I wanted to let you know and Brian know that everything you complain about with the format and how the show is run overall is greatly multiplied in person. My mom runs a behavior services company for people with various mental disabilities, and many of them are wrestling fans. There's probably a line there somewhere. So every so often, if there's a show reasonably close, she'll rent a bus and take the clients and staff to the wrestling show. Well, that's nice. What none of them, including my mom, knew was that this was going to be 3 hours with maybe 30 minutes of wrestling. The first thing to note is the show was legitimately a full house, very few empty seats. Everyone stayed till the main event. That's where the praise ends. And that is amazing when you think about that. People now are paying these incredible prices, Brian, to go to a show that 30 years ago, if they'd seen the same show, they would have run screaming to the goddamn box office to ask for their $8 or $10 back because it was so fucking boring and they sat there and watched and nothing happened. But anyway, here, that's where the praise ends, John continues. And apparently John was using that. It's not spell check, but it's like it anticipates the word you're trying to type.
Autocorrect.
Okay, whatever, because his next sentence was supposed to say, this venue had no other screens to watch any packages or backstage interviews. But what the line says is, this venue had no other screens to watch any packages or bastard interviews.
What's he trying to say?
Aside from the entranceway that played the wrestler's entrance video, and unless you were seated directly across from said screen under the WrestleMania sign, you couldn't see most, if any, of the screen. When the Street Profits challenged Solo and Jimmy Uso, they made both teams wait in the ring staring at each other for 3 minutes while commercials played, some of which were played in the fucking arena. It felt so long that fans started to chant, "Start the match," which is why there was a big pop when it finally came back from commercial. To buy time during commercials and try to appease fans, WWE decided the best thing to do was several fan cam segments, such as DX Cam, which was fans doing DX impressions and showing their signs. And when the announcer is reading signs to fill time, you know something is wrong. Again, 30 years ago, Vince McMahon would have had a conniption fit if the live audience in the building was sitting there on their hands staring. I mean, yeah, there were tape changes in those days, due to, production standards of the time and, and delays that you couldn't help if a fucking lighting fuse went out. But I mean, when everything's technically working, he didn't want any dead time. Anyway. The other issue that showed up near the end of the show was the main event. We were told near the beginning the main event was Theory versus Rollins for the U.S. title in a street fight. Wasn't the match I wanted to see Rollins and Theory in, but I'd take what I can get at this point. Well, at 10:45, Becky and Lita come out for the women's tag title match. I started to clock watch thinking there's no way they're going to have both the matches in 15 minutes. Turns out the answer was no, since Theory and Rollins were the post-show and nobody in the arena knew. There was no announcement of the women's tag being the main event, so myself and one of my mom's staff who barely knows wrestling were confused as she asked me, "Isn't there supposed to be another match?" And 5 minutes into the tag, my mom texts me, "Why are the girls going this long?" All in all, the clients had fun since they were simply happy to be at a show again. But the rest of us who were either barely fans or a hardcore fan like myself felt incredibly disappointed. My mom and I have gone to Mania several times, and even those 6-hour extravaganzas never felt this long. Is it just now that the fans know, Brian, that they're buying a ticket to go and sit in the audience of like a television talk show or game show or whatever, and it's not like going to see an actual wrestling show anymore?
You don't know if it's your first time going.
But I mean, for the ones who still want to go back,
I guess you have to come
they're
to
selling
expect it.
tickets. They're selling tickets. They're filling the buildings up.
You know, it says something, and this is, I guess, exclusive to WWE because AEW just runs through stuff through commercials and everything. WWE does it in a weird way that I'm sure the network likes it.
Yes,
but it's
everything that's laid out in their program is to milk people's attention to commercials and advertising and spots, not to keep them into the wrestling matches. But so the network loves it.
So the network loves it, but it makes it a hard show to watch. But with WWE, you see those audiences, and at times they're silent. If that's the way you're treating your live audience, it's no wonder they're silent. You're putting them in a zone to be silent, which is different than if there's nonstop action and they're just sitting there and they're silent.
Well, but the thing is, as we've seen, the overlap of that is even when they get action, a lot of times they're still silent because then they're like, please give us a match. And then the match is Otis versus Mansois or Minaj or whatever his fucking, and they're like, ah, shit. And then they're sitting there again.
And it goes 3 minutes.
Yeah. But then now they know, well, shit, that was our match. We probably ain't gonna get another match for 20 or 30 minutes. And so no wonder they pop on, is it a self-fulfilling prophecy? They pop on the entrances of the big stars, even if they're doing promos or just walking out, because at least we know who these motherfuckers are and we want to see them do something. Come in and take a shit at this point.
WWE were pioneers in terms of piping in crowd noise, going back to the 80s. What do you think is worse for crowd energy? A taping like this, and this is what they've been doing for a while now, or those big TV tapings in the 80s where they taped like 5 hours, 4 hours of TV and then another hour of dark matches. And the people just had to sit there for like 40 matches.
Yeah, well, the smart fans in those days complained about those. But the average fan loved it because you saw everybody, sometimes 2 or 3 times, and everything kept moving, and it was basically, except for an occasional angle or dark match, it was all squashes, but you were seeing all the big stars doing all the shit they knew to some poor fucking crash test dummy, and they were out in 3 or 4 minutes. So, and especially because of the kids' audience at that time period, honestly, in those days, and I got in on the tail end of those things, those tapings were worse on the fucking talent than the fans. At least there was always something going on in front of the fans. The fucking talent, when you got there at noon and you left the building at 12:30 the next morning, it was fucking ludicrous.
You got to see everyone's finisher, but you didn't get sick of it because it finished the match. And then it would just go on to the next one.
But there were no 10-minute entrances. There were no 20-minute fucking promo segments. Even the tape changes. The fucking TV crew attacked tape changes like the pit crew at the Indy 500 because Vince was, pissed if they had downtime. They had to technically doing all those different shows in one night. But if it was longer than necessary, he'd get hot. And I used to do an old trick that Crockett did in the days of studio wrestling in various places on TV. They did this. I did it in OVW at our TV tapings in the days before you were post-producing a television program because you didn't have the goddamn budget or the capability or whatever. You're shooting it live to tape. It was like a live program. But let's say Crockett wanted to air the world title match between Flair and Dusty and the Omni, 6 or 8 minutes of that with the commentators talking about it or whatever the fuck. You've got, instead of leaving your live audience in the venue, because you didn't have big screens then either. And they didn't come to that fucking show to watch goddamn television. They came to see wrestling. So he would put a dark match in, and I would do the same thing in OVW in our arena. While we were showing a VTR segment or something from a big show at the Gardens or whatever, there would be a match in the ring that was going on for the live crowd. And you remember in Mid-South Wrestling, Watts did that. Because you'd hear
it in the background, yeah.
You'd hear it in the background when you went to the announce desk. And that was a point that I made a few times on the OVW shows, when you would hear bam, bam, bam in the ring while we're talking about what we just saw on tape. I'd say, and by the way, folks, a match in the ring we're not able to televise tonight. You can only see everything if you come down live to the Davis Arena on Wednesday nights, blah, blah, blah. But that way, you didn't kill your crowd sitting there with their dicks in their hands. And you gave them something to watch, and they didn't know whether it was going to be on TV or not. And a lot of times I'd have goddamn the handheld camera guys shoot it anyway, act like they were shooting it so people couldn't fucking tell. But that, that was in the days when you literally, if you were going to show a 6-minute VTR and you were coming out of a break and you were going to pitch to it and then go back to a break, you were down for 10 or 11 minutes in the building. So from action. So that way you gave the people something to watch while you're rolling that stuff in for the television audience. And it's not again, I know now the rights fees and television and people will just look down their nose at the house show gate. But if they had 10,000 people in Grand Rapids, they said the building was packed, or 10,000 people anywhere, just a round number, you can do math. And what are these fucking tickets these days? $50? More at ringside, less in general admission. Would it be a $50 average?
Well, I don't know, because it's a lot more at ringside. You may get to walk away with your chair, but you're going to pay a ton for it.
Okay, well, I mean just any TV taping. I don't know if they do the collectible chairs. The point is, if you're doing $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 gate for a live event, plus those people that came are going to buy merchandise and they're going to patronize the food and drink stand at the arena and make them happy. And they've already paid the arena parking, so they're happy. So everybody wants to do this again, the arena and the WWE and the fans. They all want to have another show if everybody's happy. So why do you piss the fucking people off with making them sit there and twiddle their fucking noodle? Anyway, there ought to be a way to serve both masters without having to just bore the shit out of your. And that's if the audience in the stands is not going crazy on camera. I know they can make it sound like it, but they haven't been able to figure out a way to get the people to jump up and down and throw babies in the air on video yet when they're not. So you'd think you'd want to keep them as engaged as possible. That's one thing AEW does. Those people, they got low standards. They love everything, but they're still engaged because they're not bored. Somebody's always on the verge of fucking accidental death. Go ahead.
For one of these networks to end up thinking that this is a reasonable way to do it, Fox has major sports. USA's part of NBC. NBC they do the Olympics. I mean, they do a lot of things. Has there been some kind of I know we don't know the answer. I'm just asking the hypothetical question. Has there been a study that says if you do a wrestling show where the action's in the ring and the announcer says, "We'll be right back after this. Stay with us. The action's going on," that people will tune out more than they would if it's just out of nowhere? Oh, and she's got a headlock. Looks like she's in pain.
To black.
Then it goes to commercial, and then it comes back at random times. Is there any actual evidence that this is a better way to hold the audience than a traditional, the way they present their sporting event? They don't just in the middle of the at-bat say, "We'll be right back. We don't know what's going to happen right now." They don't do that.
Well, that Fox and USA, NBC, or what, they don't. I don't care what category it's in. They don't look at wrestling like they're sports programming. So they don't give a shit how it's formatted as long as people watch it. And I guarantee you, we did not do that in the 90s, in the Attitude Era. And I guarantee you it's something that Vince either came up with or somebody pitched to Vince in such a way that he liked it, or he got a bug in his bonnet one day.
We'll be right back. What does that mean? We're not going anywhere. We want them to stay there and watch the commercial for pancakes or whatever the fuck.
It's just so TV. Ugh.
And that, or maybe it's a Kevin. Yeah, there you go. It's either TV or it's wrestling or it's bad for, or maybe it's a Kevin Dunn thing that he agreed with. I bet you that they decreed that so long ago enough that now nobody really knows why they do it. That's just the way they do it. Nobody asks any questions. And if you do ask a question, then somebody will say, well, don't ask questions because that's the way they do it. Because I used to ask a lot of questions, and that was oftentimes the fucking answer.
See, that's what sucks, though. For the kid that discovers wrestling, like right now, this format of show is what they're seeing. And it's hard for me to imagine I would have gotten into wrestling the way I did if this was the style of wrestling, the style of format, the style of show that was out there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I like primetime wrestling. I liked Jesse Ventura and Vince McMahon talking about squash matches. That got me into it. So I wanted to see the matches. Now it's just this weird show.
But
I don't know if I would have been a fan.
Not even pitching to break to me was always just sloppy broadcasting. And I would make sure that I like to pitch to break because that gives you a chance in your midpoint. When I was structuring matches that would go 2 segments on television, the heel cutting the baby face out of his best fucking effort so far in the match and pulling the rug out from under him and starting the heat in some nefarious manner was my favorite place to go to a break because now you've got something to tell people. Fans, it looked like Steamboat was on the verge of taking Flair, but now Flair, the dirtiest player in the game, has pulled the rug out from under him. We've got one more commercial timeout. We'll be right back. Steamboat's in jeopardy. Okay, now when you come back, through the commercial break, Steamboat has been fighting back as best he could, but Flair remains in control. Now you've just reset it. And you're back in the thing instead of just some blasé, oh, somebody walked out that's not involved in this match. Pizza commercial. Anyway,